the girl in his DMs. It started with a joke, a fake profile, a picture I found online. A girl with wild curls, deep eyes, the kind of smile that says, "I'm a little dangerous." I gave her a name, Ava, just a whisper of who I once wanted to be. Unapologetic, bold, untamed. I made the account on a Wednesday. Our anniversary was on Thursday. He forgot it, again. No flowers, no card, no effort. Just silence. He came home late, smelling like perfume I didn't own. Said he was working late. Didn't look me in the eye. And I laughed, bitter, quiet, alone in the kitchen. Because I knew he was cheating. Again. But this time, instead of crying, I opened my laptop, opened a new browser window, created Ava, and sent him a message. "Hey, I saw your photo in the group chat. You have the kind of smile that gets girls in trouble." I waited. No reply. For 2 days. Then on Saturday, he replied. "And you have the kind of eyes that make trouble worth it." My hands went cold. My throat tightened. I stared at the screen for a full minute. Then typed, "What would your wife say about this?" His answer came back too quickly. "What she doesn't know won't hurt her." I closed the laptop, sat in the dark, and something inside me didn't just break. It transformed. This wasn't just about catching him. It was about understanding him. How many times had I begged for attention, begged for love, begged to be seen, and now, as someone else, he saw me. He flirted, he chased, he opened up to Ava, to a ghost I had created. Over the next few days, the messages continued. He told Ava he felt trapped at home, that his wife didn't understand him, that he needed escape. He never knew he was confessing to his wife. Sometimes I wrote things I knew would trigger him. Little emotional traps. I like guys who pay attention to the little things. My love language is time. Real time. He'd reply like a lovesick teenager. "I'd give you all my time, just say the word." I started documenting everything. Screenshots, logs, voice notes. Then one night I asked, "Ever cheated on your wife?" And he said, "Not until you." I should have felt rage. But I felt hollow. Because Ava wasn't real. But I was. And he'd rather risk our marriage for a fantasy than fight to fix what was real. That night I stared at the mirror for hours. I didn't recognize myself. Not because I wore a mask, but because I'd finally taken it off. And the scariest part? I wasn't sure I wanted to stop being Ava. He called her real. It didn't take long. 3 weeks of messages. Flirty, deep, addictive. He began checking in every morning. "Good morning, beautiful. Did you sleep okay? Thinking about your smile." He had never sent me those messages. Not even in the early days. Not even when I wore the red dress he said made me unforgettable. And one night, as I sat across from him at dinner, our plates cold, conversation dead, he was on his phone, smiling, typing. He was talking to me, but not to me, to Ava. Sabiti? I asked him baffly, "Who are you texting?" He looked up, blinked. "Just work, deadline stuff." Then he looked back down and typed, "My wife's busy tonight. I wish I was with you instead." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Because Ava didn't scream. Ava smiled. Typed, "Do you think about me even when she's near?" He replied, "Especially then. You're so much more real. Real. Real." The word echoed in my ribs like a crack in my bones. I was flesh and blood, memory and sacrifice, time and tears. I had stood by him when his father died. Held him when he lost his job. Built a life out of broken furniture and dollar store wine. And Ava, a fake profile with a free stock photo, was more real? I asked, "What do you mean?" He wrote, "She's cold, always needs proof of love, you just feel you get me." I stared at the screen. Noah had just confessed to a ghost that I, his wife, was the stranger. That night, he went to bed early. I stayed up, scrolling through our old photos. I looked at a picture of us at the beach, arms around each other, smiling. Then I looked at the chat where he told Ava, "I don't even like the ocean. My wife always drags me there." I remembered how he used to say, "The waves calm me." "Sama tai, you make the beach feel like home." Was that a lie? Or was I just the wrong woman for the truth? Days passed. The messages deepened. He sent voice notes, called her babe, said he hadn't felt this alive in years. One day he said, "You make me want to be better." I stared at the words and whispered, "Then why didn't I?" But Ava played her part. She encouraged him, challenged him, let him dream. Even as Clara shattered, Ava smiled, because Ava was born from pain, and pain knows how to pretend. Then one day, he said, "I want to see you. In real life. I need to know if you're as real in person as you are in my heart." My fingers trembled. The trap had worked. Too well. Because now he was willing to risk everything. For a woman who didn't exist. Or worse, for the woman he already had but didn't recognize anymore. The night I knew I lost him, he asked again, "Can I see you?" "Just once, 1 hour. I'll drive anywhere." "I just need to know you're real. That I'm not losing my mind." I stared at the message for 5 whole minutes, and all I could think was, "You already lost your soul." I typed nothing. I just sat there. In the living room we decorated together, while he was upstairs in bed waiting for his wife to come kiss him goodnight. Instead, he messaged the woman he thought was his escape. And I was neither. I was something in between. The lie and the truth. The fire and the ash. I had 2 choices. Reveal myself. Tell him everything. Watch him break. And maybe, finally, see regret in his eyes. Keep the mask on, let Ava lead him deeper and lose him completely. But the truth was, I had already lost him. Not tonight. Not last week. Not when he replied to Ava's first message. No. I lost him the moment he stopped looking at me like I was enough. That night, I stood outside our bedroom. Listened to him breathing. He had no idea I was dying on the other side of the door. No idea that his secret lover and his wife shared the same skin. I opened my phone. Typed 1 word. "Tomorrow." He replied in seconds. "Where? When? God, I can't wait. You won't regret this." I turned off the screen, sat on the floor, and cried. Not because I didn't want to see him, but because I knew he wasn't coming to meet Ava. He was coming to leave me. Without ever realizing, it was the same person all along. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was a funeral. For our marriage, for our trust, for every version of me that thought if I just tried harder, maybe he'd stay. In that moment, something broke inside me, but something else sparked. Not revenge, not bitterness, just clarity. The next day would be the end. Not because he chose someone else, but because I finally chose myself. The truth behind the screen. We agreed on a time, 7:30 p.m., at a quiet bar in the Arts District. Low lighting, no noise, no risk. He said, "I want it to feel intimate, like we already know each other." I replied, "We do," and I meant it more than he could ever know. At 6:45, I left the house. He didn't even ask where I was going. Said he was going to meet a client. I smiled, nodded. "Good luck." I arrived first, sat in the back corner, wearing black, hair pulled back, no makeup, just Clara. Not Ava. But I didn't sit at the table we agreed on. Instead, I chose a booth where I could see the door. Watch him enter. Watch him look for her. At 7:28, he walked in, nervous, shirt pressed, hairstyled. He looked younger somehow. Hope does that to men like him. He scanned the room. Didn't see her. Didn't see me. He sat, fidgeted, ordered a drink. Pulled out his phone, texted, "I'm here." I didn't reply. I watched. 5 minutes passed. 10. He checked his reflection in the window. Then I stood up, walked slowly toward him. He didn't notice. Not until I stood beside the table and said, "Hi, Noah." He looked up. His smile dropped so fast it almost hit the floor. "Clara?" "Yes," I said. "Or maybe Ava. Depends on who you're expecting tonight." His face turned white. He stood up, stumbled. "I can explain. Can you?" I said quietly. "Because I'd love to hear how you're going to explain falling in love with your own wife while cheating on her." He didn't sit, just stood there blinking. "You tricked me," he whispered. I laughed softly. "No, Noah, you tricked yourself. I just gave you the mirror." He looked around like someone might save him. No one did. Just me. And the silence. And the truth that had nowhere else to hide. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why would you do this?" I stepped closer because I needed to know. Not if you would cheat. I already knew that. But I needed to know if there was any part of you that still saw me, still wanted me, still knew who I was. I paused, let the words sink, then said, "And now I know." He sat, defeated. "I didn't know it was you." "Exactly," I said. "You didn't recognize the woman you married, so because you never really looked." I dropped a small envelope on the table. He looked at it. Inside were screenshots, voice notes, the message where he called Ava real. "I'm not showing this to anyone," I said, like not suing, not shaming. "Because this isn't revenge, Noah. It's goodbye." He opened his mouth, maybe to beg, maybe to cry, maybe to say the words I'd waited years to hear. I didn't let him. "I hope one day you fall in love with someone who shows you the version of yourself you're most afraid of." And I left. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, I was walking forward without carrying his weight. He said I was nothing like her. He showed up at my door the next morning, disheveled, eyes red, tie crooked, like he hadn't slept all night. I opened the door slowly. He didn't wait for permission. "Clara, please, we need to talk." I stepped aside. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to hear what excuse would come next. He sat at the kitchen counter, the one where we used to drink coffee on Sundays, the one he used to lean on while texting Ava. "You set me up," he began. "But I get it now. I messed up. I was stupid. I fell for it." I folded my arms. "You fell for me." He looked up. "No, I fell for her." And that was the first cut. "Ava," he continued. "She made me feel seen. She listened. She was soft, curious. She didn't judge me." I stared. "You mean the woman who called you out on lying to your wife? The one who pushed you to be better?" He blinked. "Yeah, but she did it differently." I leaned forward. "Noah, everything Ava said was everything I've said to you for years. But you never heard me. You only listened when I wore a mask." He rubbed his face. "I don't know. Maybe you just lost it. The spark, the mystery. You used to be fun, wild, you used to want me. And there it was. The truth. Not about me, about him. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a fantasy. A woman who never cried, never nagged, never asked where he was. A woman who flirted at 2 a.m. but didn't ask him to pick up groceries. He didn't fall for Ava. He fell for the version of me that had no weight." I smiled, sadly. "So I was never enough, unless I erased parts of myself." He didn't answer. And I knew he couldn't, because to him, love was easier when it wasn't real. He stood to leave, stopped at the door. "For what it's worth, she reminded me of who you used to be." I nodded. "Funny, because you reminded me of who I'll never be with again." He left, and this time I didn't cry. I went to my phone, deleted the Ava account, deleted the photos, the messages, the trap, not because I wanted to forget, but because I had learned enough. And this was the hardest lesson. Sometimes, even when they miss you, they don't want the real you back. Just the illusion. And I was done being anyone's illusion. The trap I didn't mean to set, I used to think it was a simple plan. Catch him, expose him, walk away with my head high. But nothing about this was simple. Because the moment he walked out that door, without asking for me, without choosing me, without realizing I was her all along, I didn't feel victorious. I felt vacant. He didn't fall for Ava. He didn't fall for me. He fell for the space between us. The version of me I had to edit down until she was easy to love. And now that it was over, I couldn't tell where Ava ended and Clara began. Because even as I deleted the account, I kept hearing the lines I wrote as her. The softness, the mystery, the confidence. And I wondered, did I invent her? Or did I bury her years ago? The trap was never just for him. It was a mirror, one I didn't expect to hold this long. I went back to the journal I started before this all began, flipped through the pages, lists of doubts, tiny heartbreaks, moments I had forgotten to grieve. Like the time he left me crying in the car because he couldn't handle my emotions. Or the time he laughed when I showed him my poetry. I once wrote, maybe if I loved myself enough, he wouldn't feel the need to find pieces of me elsewhere. But now I realized it was never about me. It was about what he couldn't hold, and what I kept trying to shrink to fit in his hands. I stood in front of the mirror, said out loud, "You are not a performance. You are not his lesson. You are not the mess he couldn't clean up. You are a woman who dared to look truth in the eye and didn't blink." And then I broke. Not out of sadness, but out of release. Out of finally letting go of the idea that closure would come with a confession. When the real closure was giving myself permission to stop waiting. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote for me. Not as Ava, not as Clara the wife, but as a woman with nothing to prove anymore. The title? The Trap I Didn't Mean to Set. And the woman who walked away anyway. When the lie became too real, Ava was gone. I deleted her account, burned the note cards, erased the conversations. But she wasn't dead. She lingered. In my thoughts, in my posture, in the way I now second-guessed everything I used to say as Clara. Because the truth? Sometimes I missed her. The way she spoke without apology. The way she made Noah chase. The way she said what I always wanted to say, but never thought I had the right to. I caught myself at a bookstore, flirting, with the barista. He smiled, asked if I'd read the new poetry collection. And I said like Ava would, I only read words that bruise me. He laughed, and I laughed back, but inside I flinched. That wasn't me, not really, but maybe it had become me. Or maybe I had created someone easier to love than Clara. And now I didn't know how to be anything else. I started rewriting my journal entries, polishing them, making them clever, sharp, a little seductive. I caught myself writing not for healing, but for attention, for admiration, for the echo of validation that Ava used to get. One night I stood in front of the mirror, hair done, lipstick on, nowhere to go. But Ava always looked ready, and part of me still needed that. still needed to feel chosen, even if it was just by the reflection in the glass. I whispered, what if she was always more than me? What if I only mattered when I became her? And then came the scariest thought of all. What if I can never go back to who I was before? Because Clara was soft, real, messy, honest. But Ava? Ava was magnetic, and maybe, just maybe, I liked the power she gave me more than the love I once begged for. I called a friend that night, Emily, the only one who knew everything. She listened, then said, you didn't become Ava to trap him. You became her because you forgot how to be heard as Clara. Now you have a choice, kill her off, or become her without losing yourself. I hung up, sat in silence, and for the first time, I didn't know which version of me deserved to survive. But what I did know, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. Not as Ava, not as Clara. Just as a woman who wants to live honest again, even if that means being broken first. The day he chose the stranger over me. It had been almost 2 months. No calls, no texts, no apologies. Silence, dressed in dignity. I thought we were done. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, he knocked on my door. He looked different. Not broken. Not sorry. Just uncertain. I opened the door, holding my breath. Noah, I said, what are you doing here? He hesitated. Can I come in? I stepped aside. Only because I knew I was no longer afraid of his presence. Only because the worst had already happened. He sat at the same table where he once said he loved me. He didn't touch the cup of tea I offered. Didn't look at me for the first few minutes. Then finally, I've been thinking a lot. About us? I asked. No, he said. About her. Ava. I blinked. Stared. Said nothing. He continued. I know she wasn't real. Or maybe she was, but the her I met online? He paused. She saw me. She pulled the truth out of me, and when she disappeared, I lost something I didn't even know I needed. I clenched my jaw, bit back the 1,000 things I wanted to scream. Noah, I whispered. I was the one who saw you. It was me. I pulled those words from you. I asked those questions. I made you feel known. And you couldn't even recognize your own wife. He shook his head slowly. I don't think you understand. Ava, she wasn't like you. She didn't demand. She didn't remind me of who I failed to be. My stomach turned. No, Noah. She reminded you of who you pretended to be. Because she didn't exist outside your screen. He stood, walked to the window, and said the thing that shattered me in a way nothing else had. If Ava ever came back, do you think she'd forgive me? The silence screamed louder than my heart ever could. I stood, walked past him, and opened the door. You just answered your own question, I said. You didn't come here for closure. You came to mourn the ghost you fell in love with. And I'm not in the business of raising the dead. He turned, eyes soft, but I'd seen those eyes before. They weren't love. They were regret wrapped in nostalgia. And regret is never enough. He stepped out, and before I closed the door, I said, tell her I said goodbye. If you ever find her again. And I shut it gently. This time, without looking back. I sat alone afterward, not broken, not angry, just empty in the most peaceful way. Because when someone chooses a stranger over the truth, they don't deserve to stay in the real story you're writing next. The face behind the profile, it started with a blog post. Title, I was the other woman in my own marriage. I didn't include names, didn't post photos, didn't scream, look at what he did. I simply saw he told the truth about the silence, about the lies, about creating a version of myself he could fall in love with just to see how far he'd fall. I hit publish, turned off my phone, went for a walk without my usual fear of running into him. By the time I returned, the post had 2,000 shares. By midnight, it had 48 bun. By the end of the week, it hit 3 million views. The comments flooded in. I thought I was the only one. I created a fake account to talk to my partner too. Thank you for saying what I never could. And over, this helped me leave. I didn't write it for fame. I wrote it for freedom, for myself, for every woman who felt invisible, for the version of me who once sat crying on the bathroom floor. Then one evening, I got a message request from an account I didn't recognize. No profile photo, just a name, NJ. I clicked. One message. It took your story for me to finally see your face, and now I can't stop seeing it everywhere. I stared at the screen, closed it, didn't reply, because I didn't need to. This wasn't a moment for reconnection. It was a moment of reckoning. Noah had seen the woman behind the profile at last, but it was too late, because now I was no longer writing for him. I was writing for the girl inside me who needed to be told, you're not crazy. You're not too much. You're not unlovable. You were just too real for someone who only knew how to love illusions. I stood in front of the mirror that night. No Ava, no Clara the wife, no mask, just me. And for the first time in years, I liked the woman I saw. Not because she was perfect, but because she was true. And that was more than enough. The woman I became after he lost me, I was invited to speak at a women's writing retreat. Theme: voices that rose from silence. I almost said no, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I didn't know if I was ready to be seen. Not as the woman who was cheated on, not as Ava, not even as Clara Jameson, the blogger, but as me. Still, I said yes. I stood backstage in a cream-colored dress, hair soft, natural. No mask, no illusion, just breath and truth, and a story only I could tell. The host's voice echoed through the hall. Our final speaker tonight wrote the story that broke the internet. But more importantly, she wrote the story that helped thousands of women pick themselves back up. Please welcome Clara Jameson. I stepped forward. The applause was warm, not wild, not thunderous, just human. And that was enough. I looked out at the faces before me, some teary, some wide-eyed, all listening. And I said, I created a woman once, someone confident, mysterious, effortless to love. Her name was Ava. She wasn't real. But the feelings she pulled from my husband, Z, were. I paused, let them breathe with me. Then I continued, and for a long time, I thought Ava was everything I could never be. Until I realized, Ava wasn't better than me. She was just freer. I told them the truth. How I watched the man I loved fall in love with the version of me I created because the real me had become invisible to him. How I caught him in the act. Not through confrontation, but through reflection. How I watched him mourn the loss of a woman who never really existed, while standing in front of the woman who had loved him for real. And then I said what changed everything. He didn't break me, he revealed me. I saw heads nod, tears fall, hands grip tighter. So I added, this isn't a story about betrayal. This is a story about coming home, to yourself. That night, after the event, a woman approached me, maybe 60, eyes like glass. She held my hand and said, I waited 20 years to hear what you just said. And then she whispered, I think I'm finally ready to choose myself. I cried in the car afterward, not because I was sad, but because I had become the woman I wished had spoken to me years ago. When I got home, I opened a new journal. First page, blank. Then I wrote, today I didn't write as Ava. I didn't write as the broken wife. I didn't write for him. I wrote as me. And that was the real rebirth. Not in fire, not in revenge, but in truth. In choosing to live without pretending anymore. So to every woman reading this, you don't need to become someone else to be loved. You just need to remember who you were before the world convinced you weren't enough. And to him, if he's still reading, you didn't lose me when you cheated. You lost me when you couldn't see that I was always right there, waiting to be loved without needing to disappear. Some people leave scars, others leave lessons. Burn and reborn stories that break you, then rebuild you.